with 80% going to HRI, or €64 million, and 20% going to Bord na Gan, or €16 million. In order to allow my department to provide the monies allocated in Budget 2017, it is necessary to comply with the technical requirements under Section 12(13) of the Horse and Greyhound Racing Act to increase the cumulative limit on the amount payable from the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund by 80 million to some 1.118 billion. This is achieved by way of the regulations submitted to this committee today. The aggregate limit on the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund has been increased in this manner in 2004, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014 and 2015. It is estimated that the Irish bloodstock industry provides 14,000 jobs and it contributes almost 1.1 billion to the Irish economy. In 2015, bloodstock export sales rose to 268 million in what was a remarkable year for the Irish bloodstock industry. The industry is also estimated to account for up to 80,000 tourists to Ireland each year. These are among the estimated 1 million plus people who attend horse races each year in this country. Ireland holds a distinguished position in the thoroughbred racing world, being the biggest producer of thoroughbred foals in Europe and is the fourth largest producer in the world. Approximately 40% of the European Union's output of thoroughbreds and 11% of the total worldwide are produced in Ireland. The Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund has been pivotal in shaping the destiny of this dynamic industry. It has helped Ireland to become a world centre of excellence for horse racing and has allowed Horse Racing Ireland to undertake a capital investment programme that has underpinned growth in the sector. The horse racing industry satisfies all the critical requirements for success in terms of employment and foreign direct investment, and it is the type of export-oriented industry we need. The industry has been a flagship for this country and has an immeasurable influence on Ireland's international reputation in recent years. Government funding of this key industry is an excellent opportunity to yield a high return for its investment. Support for certain strategic industries is important to future economic growth and can provide widespread benefits for our society as well as for our economy. The greyhound racing industry is also an important driver of employment and economic activity in both rural and urban areas. Bord na Gan estimates that the greyhound industry employs over 10,300 people and contributes an estimated 500 million in economic output to local economies around tracks which have a wide geographic spread. Bord na Gan reports that since 2002, over 10 million people have attended greyhound racing meetings. The board itself employs over 700 people, including full and part-time, and has an annual turnover of approximately 40 million. Funds generated from racing are reinvested in the industry through contributions to prize money and grants to various bodies involved in the greyhound racing and breeding sector, as well as promotion of greyhound welfare and the regulation of the industry. The challenge for the board is to encourage the development of a commercial greyhound racing and breeding industry built on a customer-focused, high-quality entertainment product which meets the highest international standards of regulation. The funding being provided to the greyhound racing sector helps sustain a long-standing tradition, as the industry is part of the social fabric of our country. This funding underpins economic activity in what are, in many instances, less affluent regions of the country. It has also contributed significantly to the improved facilities now available at greyhound tracks around Ireland. Greyhound racing is an activity that is inextricably linked to the farming community, and while it is undoubtedly part of the fabric of rural Ireland, it also enjoys a strong urban support base. The overall objective of the government is to ensure that the horse and greyhound racing industries achieve their maximum potential and in so doing contribute to the economic and social development. Governments of all persuasions have acknowledged the importance of these industries and have supported them through legislation and policy initiatives over a long period of time. Without this support, these vital industries would simply not survive. The advent of new technologies and business models has challenged the government to re-evaluate the funding mechanisms for the industry. As part of its overall commitment to the industry, the government has addressed through legislation the anomaly whereby remote and online betting operators were outside the tax net. The Betting Amendment Act 2015 came into force on the 15th of April 2015. The Act brings betting exchanges and the internet and mobile betting providers within the scope of the existing licensing regime and extends the existing 1% turnover tax on land-based bookmakers' activities to online and mobile bookmakers. The Act also means that a 15% commission tax for betting exchanges has also been implemented. These measures have had a very positive effect on revenue streams, with significant increases being realised. Betting tax has increased by 20 million in 2016 when compared to this time last year. Both Horse Racing Ireland and Bord na Gán have operated through challenging economic conditions over the past several years, and my predecessor, Simon Coveney TD, has had the activities and operations of both bodies reviewed. The Horse Racing Ireland Act, which gives effect to the recommendations of the Indecon report, came into force on the 8th of February 2016, with certain sections commenced on the 9th of March 2016 and further sections due to commence in January 2017. The Act introduced a range of improvements in governance and accountability arrangements, many of which derive from recommendations made by Indecon economic consultants following their review of the sector. Indecon international consultants were also commissioned to conduct a review of certain matters relating to Bord na Gán in order to assess the suitability of the legal governance and regulatory framework supporting the greyhound industry and to identify opportunities to maximise its commercial income. In this regard, I will shortly be bringing forward the heads of a greyhound industry bill to ensure that the principles of good governance and regulation are clearly and unambiguously laid down in primary legislation. In broad terms, the bill seeks to implement the deficiencies in the existing legislation as identified in a report authored by this committee in January 2016 and in both the Indecon and Morris reports. The bill addresses the governance of Bord na Gán. It strengthens regulatory controls in the industry, modernises sanctions and improves integrity with a view to building a reputation for exceptional regulation in this sector. I believe that this bill will strengthen the Irish greyhound industry, enable it to deal with the existing challenges and maximise its future potential. I expect that this committee will have a significant role to play in the pre-legislative scrutiny process, and I look forward to engaging with the members of the committee in this regard. Without doubt, Horse Racing Ireland and Bord na Gán face significant challenges as they work to grow and develop the horse and greyhound industries in an extremely competitive market segment. I am nonetheless confident that these industries have tremendous growth potential, with sporting, leisure, tourism and cultural appeal across a wide demographic, both national and international. The thoroughbred horse racing industry is a major driver in the economy, and both industries breathe life and jobs into their respective communities from the grassroots up. I very much appreciate the contribution that the members of this committee have made to the debate on the future of these critically important industries. I believe that the €80 million allocation is vital to help secure rural jobs and sustain communities. Many parts of rural Ireland face ongoing challenges in terms of declining populations, lack of jobs, a shortage of enterprise and poor infrastructure. Government plays an important role in considering policy and providing an input into legislation to counter these problems and nurture all potential growth. I am confident that it is the goal of all of us here to fully realise the contribution of these sectors to the Irish economy, to employment and to the social and cultural fabric of this country. The degree of success of these initiatives is dependent on the hugely important contribution made by the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund. A copy of the draft regulation has been circulated to members of the Joint Committee. Section 12(13) of the Horse and Greyhound Racing Act 2001 provides that a draft of these regulations be laid before both houses of the Oireachtas and a resolution approving the draft be passed by each house before the regulations are made by the Minister. Accordingly, I ask you for your support so as to ensure that the Horse Racing Ireland and Bord na Gán receives the funding provided for in Budget 2017, and that the very important role of these industries and the economic activity generated by them are sustained into the future. I commend this regulation to the committee and I look forward to discussing any matters arising from the regulation. Thank you.
Thanks, Minister. Deputy Cahill.
Minister, just on the broadening of the tax base, I think that had to be welcomed, and remote and online betting, it had to contribute to the two industries, both Greyhound and Horse Racing Ireland. But I would just like to ask, have we any idea how much betting is still outside the tax net? And also, track bookmakers are under, their numbers have dwindled greatly and under a lot of financial pressure. And we have a tax regime in now that's one hat fits all, and they're being taxed on track bookmakers, who often are small independent operators, which not a huge turnover, are being taxed at the same rate as the major multinational companies like Ladbrokes and Boyle Sports and other major companies. And I think we have to have some recognition of the unique nature of track bookmaking and the cost that have to incur for standing, the cost they have to incur for attending race meetings, and the unique aspect that they bring to Irish horse racing and to Irish greyhound racing. So I think, and I know Deputy McGrath has an amendment going to the finance bill in the Senate that's trying to address what track bookmakers feel are anomalies as the way that they are being treated the same as major multinationals. And I think there has to be some recognition of their unique contribution to the industry, and the fact that they're probably on a turnover, and they do online betting now because on-course turnover has dropped very, very significantly. But I think there has to be some recognition that track bookmakers are different to these multinational companies who are dealing in multi-millions rather than multi-million euros. So I think while broadening tax base is definitely was the way forward, I think we have to make some recognition of track bookmakers and the difficulty that they are facing. And this one hat fits all as regards the taxation of the industry isn't going to work if we're going to preserve track bookmakers.
Thanks, Deputy. Deputy Kenny.
Yes, again, thank you, Minister, for your comments in regard to this. I suppose this goes back quite a while, and we've had our swords have crossed a number of times in relation to this, and certainly with regard to horse racing in Ireland, I still have very serious concerns with the amount of money that they're receiving from the taxpayer and how it's been used. And I suppose one of the basic things that strikes me immediately is I understand the number of owners in the horse racing industry in Ireland has almost dropped by 50% in the last number of years, which shows a concentration of it to the larger, more wealthy elite at the very top, and the smaller people being pushed out at the bottom. And I just don't know, and I haven't seen anywhere where horse racing in Ireland has any scheme in place to support small owners and small breeders, to try and help them to ensure that they stay in the industry and that they can develop and prosper there. The whole issue of which is part of the horse racing in Ireland also has, I suppose, a kind of a subsidiary of it is the Irish Thoroughbred Marketing, and the work that they do to bring new buyers in and all of that. It's always been brought to the places like Culmore or Goffs or these places where they bring the buyers to. But again, it's for the guys at the very top end of the thing rather than for the people at the bottom end. And I think there is huge questions to be asked in regard to all of that and where this money has been spent, and the amount of public money that's gone into pay for the prize money at the big races is something that just simply is unacceptable in my mind when we look at the situation that we have in other sections of the country up and down through the place. And it's simply wrong. And I just wonder, that's not going to the other side of it, which we also had here, of course, the Board of Horse Racing in Ireland. And I certainly feel, and I think most board members would agree, they were very scant when it come to answering the hard questions. And they didn't answer a lot of the questions, and there's been a lot of questions put to them since then, and there's been information sought from them, and it hasn't been forthcoming to the degree that I think we would want to see it coming. So I think there's still an awful lot of questions to be answered by them. The CEO of Horse Racing in Ireland was supposed to come in here, and as of yet we have had, I don't think, any sign of him coming before the committee to answer questions, because I'm very seriously concerned in regard to his role in getting himself reappointed to that position. And I think that, at this point, with the amount of money we're talking about here, that these questions simply have to be answered before we can proceed with this situation. I'm just wondering as well, the board of all these state bodies, let it be Board Nagon or let it be Horse Racing in Ireland, are they, I suppose, open to or amenable to the Protected Disclosures Act if they feel that there's things happening in regard to the board and how it's been done? Can they forward that information to yourself or to somebody else to ensure that things are corrected? Because there are still an awful lot of things in regard to that whole industry, particularly the horse racing industry from my point of view, and indeed there's a lot of people who would have questions about Board Nagon and how it's been run as well, that need to be dealt with. And I don't think they've been dealt with appropriately, and I certainly think that we have a long way to go before we're in a position, certainly before I've been in a position, to see this amount of money. 80 million euros is an awful lot of money to be put into organisations like this.
Before I move on to Deputy Pringle, just to clarify that we invited the Chief Executive of HRI to come before the committee in the new year. So obviously it's only before Christmas, so I expect we'll have him before the committee in the new year. Deputy Pringle.
Thanks, Chairman. Minister, just two questions. Just suppose, we're talking here today about the allocation of 80 million euros to horse racing in Ireland and Board Nagon. And in your opening statement there, you said that they contribute 1.6 billion euros to the economy, and then Board Nagon has 500 million euro economic output. And you go on then to say that, that without the support, these vital industries would simply not survive. I mean, it only represents 5% of the total contribution to the economy, that's 80 million. So I just wonder, at what point do the industries become self-sustaining, and that they can actually continue to operate without 80 million euros a year, or is that an aim of the government, or what is the actual aim to actually in allocating this money every year? And maybe you could square the differences between the actual contribution and the statement that they need this money to survive as well, if you could just explain a wee bit on that. And just in relation to horse race in Ireland and the 64 million euros that they're receiving, there is proposals out there in relation to harness racing that horse racing in Ireland seem to be opposed to the development of any harness racing, and surely that would be seen as being a way of developing the industry further as well, and tapping into that potential there as well. And I just wonder how that squares with the development of horse racing and the opposition to harness racing, and what the department's view would be on that.
Thanks, Deputy. Minister, I'll ask you to take those three questioners now first, if you don't mind.
Okay. Well, thank Deputies Cahill, Kenny and Pringle for their questions. On the issue of the tax base and the online betting developments, we've just witnessed, I think, about to witness the first full year of its impact. I think it came in mid-2015. So we've had the first full calendar year, and I think it might be opportune, and I think that, if I'm not mistaken, the Department of Finance would have kind of indicated that when it had some window of critical time where it could have observed the performance of the sector under that new regime, it would be open to looking at, what were the appropriate next steps in that context. And I appreciate there are many views out there about that. But I'd say this: I do share your view, Deputy Cahill, that the on-course bookmaker is part of the tradition, both in terms of horse racing and greyhound racing. And the demise of the on-course bookmaker would be something, I think, that would remove a lot of the colour and the entertainment and the value from the experience of going either horse or greyhound racing. And I think it would be something that the respective boards of both HRI and Bord na Gan should reflect on, in terms of how they might incentivise the continued participation of on-course bookmaking also as a competitive leverage for punters against other forms of betting. There is, I suppose, an inexorable march of technology, and there is ample documentary evidence of the kind of rampant growth of online betting as the choice of a lot of punters now. But I think I certainly share your view that the on-track bookmaker brings something unique to the table, and I would like to see how maybe perhaps Bord na Gan and HRI could, in respect of their own role in that regard, see how that might be facilitated. And I think it's something that the Department of Finance, in the context of tax legislation in this area, could look at also. Deputy, can you raise a number of issues, and in no particular order? I'll try and deal with them. Both Bord na Gan and HRI have provisions in place under the protected disclosure arrangement, so anybody who feels that they have anything to disclose can do so within that protected legal framework, and I think that's as it should be. And I think all of us share the objective of having, an industry that works well, that is properly regulated, and that where people feel that they can speak freely, and I think that's important. On this issue of ownership, we have levels of ownership. You're making the point, Deputy Kinney, in particular regarding the ownership of horses, and your inference is that this is becoming, the pursuit of the elite. We've come through a very difficult economic period, and it's inevitable that a number of owners would have fallen out of the system. And that's something that I know that HRI and the industry generally is anxious to readdress. One of the meetings which I had very early on after my appointment was with a group of people who were involved in the running of point-to-points. Both the community organisers of point-to-points, the handlers and owners and trainers all in the one room talking to me about this issue. And because of the economic downturn, a lot of people, in terms of discretionary spending, opted out of horse ownership, be they sole owners or by way of syndicates. All of that fell by the wayside. But I am pleased to report to you that there is, I think, in terms of the most recent trends for 2016, there is something of a pickup. That's early days, and we don't want to over egg the figures, but there is an increase in the horses in training are up by 4.5%. Active owners are up 1%. New owners are up 11%. Attendances at race meetings are up 1%, and there's a number of other indicators which are moving in the right direction. And I think that's important. I think the more broadly based the industry is, the better. And it is important to acknowledge that, I think every county in the country has, farmers who are involved in horse breeding, etc. It is, a broadly based rural enterprise. Obviously, we read and hear a lot about, the cream of the crop who give us our international reputation as a country that does this business exceptionally well. But that's based on having a very solid foundation, and part of that is the point-to-points owners and trainers and organisers, and that feeds up then to to having the Aidan O'Briens and the Willie Mullinses and all of these people who represent us on international stages with distinction. And I think the challenge is to make sure that we maintain the foundations of the industry in solid health, and I think that's something that the industry, from my engagement with them, I know are extremely concerned about. You did also make reference to the fact that the board Nagan, I think the point you made was that there are issues that need to be dealt with. And my department acknowledges, there's a report from this committee previously, there's a Morris report, there's an Indicon report, which I referenced in my opening remarks. As a consequence of all of those, I'm committed to bringing forward legislation in this area at the earliest possible date. I would imagine it's not going to make publication now in heads of bill format before the end of this year, but I would imagine very early on in the new year that we will be publishing legislation dealing with a range of the issues that have given rise to concern and comment in the public domain about that industry, and ensuring that it is, in terms of the legislative framework, fit for purpose for the years ahead. And it will address the issues raised in this committee's report and in the Indicon report and in the Morris report. And I think it's important that members here would have the opportunity then to have their input and ensure that collectively we get the best possible legal framework for the industry, because it is, in terms of participation, in terms of colour that it brings to life in rural Ireland, in terms of ownership, training, greyhound tracks that are dotted all over the country from Mullingar to Youghal and a lot of points in between. It does have a certain appeal, and certainly it has a significant financial input that we need to ensure we put on a solid footing, legislative and otherwise, for the future. Deputy Pringle raised the issue about should this industry be self-financing, and why either in horses or dogs does it need 80 million state funding? It's an industry that has an ambition to grow. In its own document, if I recall, on the horse racing side, it's an industry worth in excess of €1 billion, but the ambition is over the next number of years to grow that, to double that figure, and that requires kind of state assistance. And some of the things, for example, that the state is putting funding into is, for example, the capital investment programme on racecourses. And I was fortunate enough earlier this year to be down in Listowel at the in Deputy Ferris's constituency to celebrate the occasion of an investment there through HRI in redevelopment of facilities there, which would be enhancing the punters' experience when they go to Listowel races. Likewise, there is on the other side of that capital development. There's a flagship project for the Curragh, which has secured planning. It's going through capital evaluation now. I think, if my memory is right, that's a €60 million project, which is funded by the state, the HRI, the Turf Club, and outside funding as well. And it's important that in an industry that we are a kind of a global leader in, that we would have facilities that can showcase the industry in its best light. So therefore, the Curragh is important, but also, you know, from Listowel to Ballinrobe to Thurles to Tramore, you know, that the facilities are up to scratch, and there is a significant capital investment programme that the state is involved in providing funding for. So that's why I think you know, the industry will do a lot and does in terms of foreign earnings, job creation, opportunities, etc. But the state can help as well, no more than the state turns its back on any other sector that has growth potential. It doesn't say, well, because you have ambition to grow, you should do it all yourself. If we can assist and accelerate the growth, that brings a dividend to all of us in terms of tax revenues, employment created, etc. And that's why I think it's appropriate that the state would invest in it. It's an industry that's very broadly spread. It's by and large a rural-based industry as well. You also mentioned on the issue of harness racing, and I know this was an issue that I think Deputy Ferris might have raised here a year, 12 months ago as well, in the context of the industry. Now, it's not particularly germane to HRI. The Harness Racing Association, as I understand it, are affiliated to Horse Sport Ireland, but we have in recent times engaged with them. We provided €24,000 for a stud book related project. We assisted with €22,000 for an animal welfare project. I understand, for example, that there was also some funding received under LEADER for redevelopment of or assistance with their racetrack in Portmarnock. And we have also, more recently, my department has engaged Indicon consultants to look at the potential of that sector, for the financial potential of that sector, as a bedrock on which to base whatever funding requirements we might provide to that sector in the future. So it's not that we have turned our back on any particular sector. And certainly since we engaged here last year, a lot has happened. And those consultants who are now engaged will hopefully provide us with the rationale to see how we can further exploit the potential of the sector.
Thanks, Minister. Any other from Deputy Penrose?
Yeah, thank you, Minister. Minister, surely the aim of the horse and greyhound industry is to actually reach a position that they're self-financing. And I think, I mean, if you meet a lot of the stakeholders and sector players, they will indicate that that's their objective as well. You know, because I mean, you know, in fairness, the state supported them through very difficult times during the course of when the state had very little money to allocate to other very worthy projects and worthy adventures in other areas. And if you talk to somebody dealing with the bookmaking industry, they see lots of potential where that can be achieved. But Deputy Cal is right, not alone just the on-course bookmaker who has an essential role in providing, because I mean, they still take €3 and €5 of a bet, whereas all those online boys and that, they just want, it's into big rollers there. So we have to protect what the ordinary people might just share the odd bet. And that has led now, I mean, the way the thing is going, the bookmaker on the streets and across the villages of this country have been wiped out. There's no bookmakers now in rural Ireland, they're just been wiped out. And therefore, what they're very concerned about is that there should be a cut-off, a turnover point of about 2 million or so that they can't be classified. How can you class a little place in my own village where we had a bookmaker who just, you know, because of the economic circumstances had to disappear, but where there's a population of about 350 or 400 people, and then you have somebody in a very high street, very high profile with 60 or 70 bookmaking in a chain. You know, you have to differentiate that out there as well, and that's important because I mean, you know, some of those small bookmakers, to give, funny enough, there's a few local jobs available in them as well. So we can't. And what happens is, like in this country, we don't regulate for years, and then when we regulate, it's over prescriptive, and we wipe everyone out with the big brush in roads in front of us. So I think that's important, that there has to be a differentiation between the type of bookmaker that's involved and that has been made abundantly forward. The Morris report has been available, and you know, I mean, obviously it has raised some serious issues in this. It's no use, we can't be putting that under the carpet. I mean, you talk to people in the greyhound industry and they tell you in another couple of years there'll be no greyhound industry. That's what they tell you anyhow. The owners are disappeared and everything else. And there's huge questions in terms of the integrity of the industry. That's a huge issue. No use, you can beat around bushes all you like and dive under it for cover, but that's the big issue. That comes layering out with the report, doesn't it? And that has to be tackled. And we'll be watching carefully the heads of the greyhound bill that's going to be going forward. And if it doesn't tackle this once and for all, there has to be zero tolerance. There can't be any nonsense of little bits in this and acceptance of half acceptance of this. There has to be zero tolerance in terms that the integrity of every race is run through the forum with no outside or external influences in terms of the performance of horses or anybody or dogs or any other thing in the industry. And that goes right through to the breeding thing, that has to be protected in an overarching way. That gives great confidence right across the board. And those are the things. And again, the governance area has to be tightened up in that area as well, in the context. And governance is important because you're given huge lumps of state money that's extremely scarce. We still can't get a lot of resources that are required in other areas that have huge human costs as well and impact. So some people tell me that the estimate of the 10,000 people employed in the industry is such a gross overestimate that it's almost laughable. Now, I don't know. If you put me into the point-to-point scene and stuff like that, I know plenty, but I don't know enough about dogs, except that you're foolish enough to back your few bob over less than 30 seconds, you lose all your money. That's all I know. And I've done it, probably, stupidly. But anyhow, that happens. But, I mean, lose it all. I lost it enough to be stupid. But in any event, I mean, we have to get down to know that we know how many, if we're giving money to the industry, and I'm not adverse to helping out industries, making sure we get them over, because I know how important they are in rural areas. And they're given an outlet, and a recreational outlet, as well as an income outlet, an income generation capacity to those people. But we have to know how many people are actually in the industry. We can't be just putting out, I think it implies, that won't get you anywhere, because value for money is important in that. And then that turns me back to the great thing that, I mean, we had the Indicon report, we had it in the horse racing industry, and we had it with the HRI and that. And I'm looking forward to them preparing their value for money audit that they promised us. That should be top of their agenda and top of their board meetings, and I anticipate that it is, and if it's not, they should question themselves, because this has been demanded here by you, Minister, through your officials, and through us here in a very concerted way and unanimous way, and that should be forthcoming in that regard. And certainly, I hope that lessons have been learned in terms of governance. And I knew long I only have to be a first-year law student, not somebody who was almost 3 decades out of the law student areas, to realise why the appointment of the chief executive went the way it did. I understood that very well, and there was no you couldn't recoil from it unless you wanted a big legal action. So I mean, I understand it, and the question, the real issue is, you can't unscramble the egg and go back and cry over the spilled milk. What you have to do now is make sure that lessons have been learned in relation to all of those particular semi-state and state organisations going forward. I think that's the issue that I want to see addressed. I'm not going to rerun that horse because it's long gone past the post, but in that context. So there's a lot of money there, and like Deputy Kenny, I suppose one of the first here used to be arguing, I spent hours at the new bill, new act. I only hope that the interest, I'm not happy that the interest of people like the stable hands and heads are getting a fair cut. They're not. Did you see what happened at a recent meeting? They're no, I mean, we have to make sure, and I argue that they should have been included in boards, or certainly sub-boards. And, those are people, they're the people who you look at, and they're leading around horses. They could leave the place at 6 o'clock in the morning to get to somewhere else, and they're there all day. They're great workers. They're a great face for the industry. And I certainly salute them, and I think it's important that we ensure that they get properly remunerated and recompense and everything else, and that. And so I think that the board, you know, if we feel that they're not, people like that are not getting a fair cut, I won't be averse to coming back here with amendments seeking the support of my colleagues to ensure that everything works out in that regard, and that we have a very fair. So I mean, value for money is going to be important here on forward. I don't think anything is going to be nodded through, just nods, and. You know, I understand this will be going through for this period. It's 80 million, but it's a lot of money, and people will want to see it. But the important thing is that I don't want HRI to set off on a run like what I said. They always pick the easy targets when they're looking for money. The people they picked were owners. You know, I mean, how would the name of God could you justify that if you had a set of colours which you paid for, that come the 1st of January the following year, they wanted more money for renewing the colours? If you had a trainer acting as an agent for you in year 1, in year 2, you had to pay more money for him to continue acting as an agent. Once you got one put of money off you, they should move on and leave you alone until they found out. So they were always picking up on the easy things rather than going to big. And unfortunately, that's why all of those costs on a cumulative basis, increased costs of training and everything else, led to people leaving the syndicates. I know I was one of them myself. You had to clear out because you got the impression you're at the end of the food chain and you didn't matter. And that was the problem. So that's why I used to kick up a bit of a row here, because I was representing an awful lot of people like myself who was maybe foolish enough to get involved in syndicates. But without the like of us, you don't have it. You only have a few big knives who arrive in, swallow it up. It's no use roaring and shouting. It's great developments in the Curragh, and delighted with them, and all like that. But the important thing is you need that development down in Kilbeggan, you need it in Roscommon, you need it on down in Ballinrobe. Those are the real places. Down in Turles, down in Clonmel. I know, I go down to Clonmel, I go down there. Oh, those are the real places. And that's why the money has to be spent out there. It's great having flagship projects, bringing in all the boys and bringing in all those great people arriving, but they're multi-millionaires and maybe billionaires already. So what I want to make sure is that a few bob goes to the fella who's surviving on 300 or 400 euros a week with a family and trying to breed an odd old horse and trying to get an odd winner out of it. And they're the people that I think that, and if I think the money is going to that, I have no problem supporting any of the estimate in that regard.
Thanks, Deputy. For the information of members, we will have pre-legislative scrutiny on the greyhound bill, I expect, here after Christmas, so we'll have an opportunity then to engage with all the stakeholders involved. I think we'll have a robust discussion at that particular stage. Deputy Ferris.
Thank you, Kyle, and Minister, thank you for your presentation contributions. I am quite conscious of the value the small breeders are to rural communities. The greyhound industry is to rural Ireland. I'm very, very conscious of it. I live in an area where every second person I know in the agricultural sector or farming sector in parts of North Kerry would also be breeding greyhounds, and most of them at a loss. But I still do it because it's the way of life. It's part of their tradition. It's part of their culture, I suppose, in a sense that they have maintained that little industry for what I would argue the common good. And obviously the expectation that you will breed a Derby winner and something like that, and you know, and everything going right. I have to agree entirely with Deputy Penrose when he spoke about the integrity. And I'm not satisfied, in no way am I satisfied with the integrity of some of what's carrying on in relation to that industry. And it needs to be, I think, obviously you say there's legislation coming, I look forward to seeing that and debating it. I think what sticks in my craw an awful lot is that you have 80 million, 64 million going to Horse Racing Ireland and 16 million going to the more depressed side, the greyhound section of it. And I think there are many people that would be listening to contributions here, and obviously people that are out in the in our communities that have a very, very poor view of sections within the horse racing sector. And when you have some major trainers and horse owners who have pay no tax in the country, when you have Colmore Stud exempt from standing fees tax, the same place earning millions from stud fees. This apparently was given to them by Charlie Haughey. Well, that's what I'm told.
If we could stick to the specifics
But
of the...
to be fair now, that
Minister.
law has changed with a number of years on stallion tax.
Yeah, but that is in people's...
Just we're sticking to the motion, Deputy, all right?
I'm sticking to the motion, and you'll stop interrupting me, please. I appreciate it.
No, I just wanted to give you guidance in that regard, Deputy.
Thank you. But Deputy Kennedy, in his presentation, I think made a very, very valuable contribution in relation to the difficulties it is to try and do this without the cooperation and the lack of cooperation regarding the interviews that took place in the recent past with Horse Racing Ireland in here, and questions that are still to be answered. I have raised, as you said, Minister, regarding the harness racing here in the past and how they were prevented from having competitions, for want of a better word. And we had evidence of it that was produced here in relation to having access to a track in Dundalk. And it was from the intervention of the Minister that all that was addressed and came about. And I'm very welcome to the fact. I welcome the fact that funding has been made available at last in order to advance this sector. So I would have reservations. I've had reservations here in the past when I was on this committee, serious reservations in relation to that. But I have always voted for it. And I voted for it in the interest of what I call the common good, in order to protect the small person that is trying to keep a little industry going in rural Ireland. And that would be my advice to this committee as well, to do that. But again, I think there's an awful lot of cleaning up, and the integrity has to be restored, and that this can't go on forever.
Thanks, Deputy. Deputy Conlon, apologies, I missed you there earlier on.
No problem, no. I just indicated just around that time. So, thanks, Chairperson, and I suppose just a couple of points. Minister, in relation to 80 million is obviously a significant amount of funds to allocate on an annual basis, but at the outset I'd like to acknowledge the role that the horse racing industry and the greyhound industry play in rural Ireland, and indeed the way the sector has been built up, and the important role that state funding and support from the state has played in relation to that. And I think it's important that we do work to protect that, and indeed see both sectors develop and be enhanced as well. I think, obviously, Minister, it was particularly disappointing to see that the committee had to involve itself earlier on in the year in relation to the operations of the reappointment of the Chief Executive and Horse Racing Ireland. I think it's important that lessons are learned from that. But I think in relation to particularly the annual allocation of funding, can I just ask if in advance, and there's obviously the obligation to come before the committee and to seek the approval of the Oireachtas for the allocation of funds every year, but as part of that, do the Board of Horse Racing Ireland and Board and do they make a report to you in terms of a plan at the outset of the year as to how they are going? I know there's strategic plans, but on an annual basis, considering the Oireachtas is asked to support the allocation of funding on an annual basis, I think it would be appropriate that there would be an outline, Minister, for these meetings as well, annually, in terms of projections for the year ahead, and an update from both boards in relation to how the funding is going to be used, and also in relation to how it's helping them meet their objectives and the development of both the horse racing and the greyhound industries.
Thanks, Deputy Minister, and conclude.
Thanks very much to Deputy Penrose and Deputy Ferris and Deputy McConlogue for their questions. might just take the issue of kind of, whether the industry should be self-financing, and 80 million is a lot of money, but I think we forget the kind of circular economy as well. I mean, if you take, for example, the betting levy, the income from that to October 2016, just on 9 months or 10 months, is 50 million euros from the 1% betting levy. So, it's a lot of money to be handing over. I do think, in terms of the ambition of the industry to grow, the capital investment that's ongoing, funded by HRI, the integrated kind of way the business is into the rural economy, I think the state, probably gets a fair return from the investment that it makes, and it does, I think, enable the industry to accelerate the investment and development that has been identified for the industry, both in horse racing and the greyhound side. On the greyhound side, I think we've had, ample kind of reports from this committee, from Morris and from Indicon, to inform us now of how best to proceed and to ensure that integrity in the industry is put up in lights. And I think that's an objective that we in the department, that anybody in the industry that I've spoken to, and I know the members of the committee here, all share that objective. And I think there is an outline, in particular in the Morris report, of the issues that need to be addressed in terms of governance, in terms of integrity, in terms of anti-doping, in terms of control committees having adequate powers, in terms of the sanctions that would apply for anybody who is found to be offside. Now, my view is that this is an industry, significant economic activity, and anybody who puts its jeopardy in future should be dealt with in a very firm way. And I would hope that in the context of the legislation that we will be bringing heads of the bill forward to this committee early in the new year, that we would have an ample input from all quarters to ensure that we equip the industry with the best possible legislative framework to deal with governance, to deal with integrity, to deal with all of the issue of medication control, anti-doping, etc., and to ensure that somebody whom Deputy Ferris referred to, his neighbours in North Kerry, who stick with the industry, notwithstanding all of these allegations, can live the dream, safe in the knowledge that at least it's a level playing pitch or a level track. And I think that's what all of us want. And I'm sure that in terms of the legislation, we will address all those issues. Now, I mean, the Morris report is spoken about so often, you'd swear it was around an awful long time. It's not. It's actually only around since July. Well, it was presented to the board, I think, of Board Nagan in July of this year. I don't have actually the date of publication, but we're not hanging around. There are issues there that need to be addressed, and certainly within this department, there will be no brief for anybody who resists placing integrity at the heart of the industry, and ensuring that anybody who is a shareholder or a stakeholder in the industry can invest in it, safe in the knowledge that it's fair and above board and transparent. And that's, I think, what all of us aspire to. Just on Deputy Penrose's point, I appreciate I'm probably jumping around in terms of the issues raised, but he did raise this issue of employees in the industry, stable hands, jockeys, all of that, having a say. Now, under the legislation that was introduced here in 2015, or was it finished in January 2016? I think there is provision within that board to have a voice for all of the people, not just and they're represented, and their unions have potential for representation on it as well. The HRI Act 2016 provides for the establishment of a new industry services committee, and it comprises a chairman, 4 members, including representatives of jockeys, qualified riders, employees of the industry other than jockeys, stable staff, etc. And the chairman of that is elected selected by the members of that committee itself. So I understand that HRI is in the process of establishing that committee and is in consultation with, including others, Mandate and SIP2. So I think that's an important development. And the other thing I think which has to be acknowledged is recent initiatives by HRI in the area of putting a proper career structure and educational opportunities into place for people who go into the industry. It is the case that a lot of people go into the industry without maybe having a lot of educational qualifications under their belt. Some leave school early, and I think it is important that they be given that opportunity for continuous educational and professional development within the industry, and I think HRI have recently made initiatives in that area. The other thing in respect of ownership, and I do know that that's an issue, the stats are beginning to turn in terms of increased participation in syndicates and ownership, and I know that part of, I suppose, the reasons for that is to do with the fact that the costs to HRI at least are coming down. It's still an expensive sport to be in, and that's why syndicates are an attractive way of getting into it without anybody having to bear an excessive level of the cost. But I understand HRI's own costs have dropped to owners by 30% in recent times. Look, we've come through a very difficult time, and I suppose industry and governance bodies probably made decisions based on short-term financial need rather than strategically being able to look at the long term. We're now in a situation where we have a little bit more light within which to operate, and those kind of strategically informed decisions are being made, and that's being reflected on the increased level of ownership. On points made about harness racing, just another point. I understand that in respect of somebody made reference to Dundalk Track, there's an agreement now between the Irish Harness Racing Association and HRI for access to the track, I think on 5 different occasions for 5 meetings. So that's progress, and as I said, we await the outcome of the Indicon report, which will give us hopefully a rationale on which, or a strategic basis on which to adjudicate whether or not it's a sector that merits further investment and has further potential. It is something that has an international dimension to it. I know that I recall as a child at Ballingeary show sulky races, which is a kind of a different version of that, So like it is something, and in West Cork they have road races in this area as well. So it's something that there is some potential to explore anyway, and see what rationale there might be for further investment. And that's something we're open to, even though it's not a HRI affiliate. It's affiliated with Horse Sport Ireland, which is a separate agency.
It took a ministerial intervention in this committee to get HRI to give the Dundalk Track to the harness racers, and that left a very bad taste in a lot of people's mouth.
Well, look, I mean, if there were mistakes made in the past, I think it's, as long as collectively we all learn from those mistakes, both those here in the room and those outside the room, that's a good thing. And if I don't want to say any more about that, but I mean, we have a situation now where they have access to a track, and let's see, what comes out of the Indicon report. On Deputy McConaughey's point, which again referenced the 80 million, and it is a lot of money. It certainly is a lot of money today, and there are competing demands for that kind of money. There is a 5-year strategic plan on HRI. We get obviously their annual report, but I don't see anything wrong with the suggestion that there should be on a structured basis an engagement with the board, perhaps both here and with my department. That's something we can take up.
Briefly, Deputy Kenny.
Just a small point in regard to the betting tax. As you know, there's a bit of a lobby there from some sectors to get that increased slightly, and that it would help to make the industry more self-sufficient. And I'm just wondering, in regard to that as well, because something I've come across in the online betting, a person can bet online and use their credit card, which means in effect they're borrowing to bet. And for those who have an addiction in that sense, it is one of the things that I think needs to be looked at to stop that. That you won't walk into a betting shop and use your credit card, but yet you can do it online. I think it's a step in the wrong direction, and it's something that, while I know it's not directly probably your responsibility, but it's something that I think needs to be looked at. And in regard to the board Nagon and the issue that was raised about the whole integrity of that industry, like that is something that really needs to be looked at, because everywhere I go when I talk to people, they say, look, to throw their eyes up to heaven, and we have, I think, the recent case of the abducted dog is the newest one that has happened, and that all leads to this kind of a notion of the shenanigans that's going on and what's happening there. And I just wonder, what are your comments in regard to that? Can you give us any assurance, concrete assurance that is going to be tackled? Because it is, like you have said about it, and I know people who are engaged in the industry from the point of view of looking after the dog tracks and that, and they're telling me that a lot of the dog tracks, just bit by bit, they're just fallen into disrepair and fallen back because there's less and less people going to the dogs, and the main reason for that is because this impression, certainly that's out there, and I have to say it's not without foundation.
Minister, before I come back to you to conclude, as part of our brief in this committee, as I said previously, we're going to be engaging with the stakeholders involved in the greyhound industry regarding pre-legislative scrutiny. We had HRI here before, so we have invited him in again, as you know, and we will have ongoing engagement with the two sectors as part of our brief throughout the term of it all. So, we'll have an opportunity to feed into whatever process comes along there as well. So, Minister, just to conclude then.
Yeah, look. Deputy Kinney raises an issue that you can't but read about this now in all forms of media outlets in terms of the high-profile victims of gambling addiction and the ease of online gambling, etc. And that's something obviously that is a societal issue. It's something that needs to be reflected on at government level in terms of the it's not something that falls specifically within the remit of my department, but it's also something I think that the industry needs the online gambling industry generally needs to reflect on how it can identify online practices that reflect somebody who is gambling excessively and deal with that. And there are ways and best practices that can be applied to the industry that they need to reflect on. And I think that's a point well made. Nonetheless, we're not going to halt the advance of technologies. It's the platform of preference now for most people who are betting, and that's reflected in kind of the way the graph is going in terms of the yield from the levy. And there are arguments for increasing the levy from 1% to 2%, and some believe further. But as much as there are arguments for that, there are equally others who would say, in terms of the dividend from the online gambling should be made more widely available to other beneficiaries. So. That's a debate for another occasion. Nonetheless, we have moved in terms of putting at least a revenue stream from the online platforms, and I think that's welcome. And I have no doubt it will grow more. And in terms of the changes that might be envisaged, that's an issue for the Minister for Finance in the first instance in terms of taxation. But if I could conclude on one point, on integrity. Integrity is something that I think is an objective that all of us face, and we have now, as I said earlier, sufficient reports and consultants and the wisdom of this committee itself, and numerous other public commentators and people who've spoken to members here and to myself, that this is an issue that needs to be addressed. We are committed to and legislation will only go so far, but we do need to equip Bord na Gan with all of the necessary legislative tools, and that's what the legislation that we will bring forward will aim to do. And I think that's an objective that we collectively share. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Minister. That concludes our consideration of the motion. In accordance with standing orders, a message will be sent to the Clerk of the Dáil and the Acting Clerk of the Senate stating that this committee has completed its consideration of the motion. I also propose that her report of the proceedings of today's meeting with details of contributions made by members and queries and those members who spoke will be laid before both houses of the Oireachtas. Is that agreed? Agreed? Okay, thank you.
Will there be further debate on it in the Dáil when it comes to that, or does it?
So I don't want to prejudge that. Okay.
No, I just wonder if there's...
It's not a matter for here. We just pass on the motion from here today. Obviously, if it's agreed, it's up then to others, obviously, the business committee, I presume, at that stage. Okay, we will have further consideration on the whole index, as I said earlier on, when pre-legislative scrutiny in the new year. Okay, is that agreed? Okay, thank you. I thank the Minister and his officials for briefing the committee on this matter here today. Now, as the Minister is staying with us, I understand, for the next stage of the meeting, I thank his officials and will suspend the meeting for a brief couple of moments.